Over the last year, I've attended 4 different interviews, 3 of which being for a static position and 1 being for a rotational position. If you're new here, my name is Mariah. I'm a Band 5 rotational physiotherapist, and I've been a rotational physio for the past 2 going on 3 years now. If you watched last week's video, you will know where I'm at currently, and if you haven't watched last week's video, check it out so you know where I'm at. In this video, I'm going to reflect solely on the feedback that I've received from the interviews, and hopefully bits of the feedback that I share will help you guys moving forward in your own interviews. If you clicked on this video hoping to hear questions that I was asked in the interviews, I'm not going to give any direct questions, so I'm sorry if that's what you came here for. Jumping right into it, the first interview I had was for a static position, and this static position was in an area, or is in an area that I'm very interested in, between one of the 2 specialities that I'm like, ooh, that's my bag. So I was like, okay, this role's come out, let me go for it, let's see. Throw my hat back in the ring after my time where I'd obviously went for a band 6 position, followed my comment, didn't get it, reflected on that in a video as well. I was like, dust myself off at this point. I think this was like maybe, let's say 2-3 months down the line. I was thinking, okay, now's time to put myself back out there. And this is the feedback that I got from the interview. I was told that I could have sold myself a bit more in the first question, which was like a scenario question about the speciality and how the skills I currently have would benefit said speciality. In terms of that, I'd say was the hardest bit. But in other factors, they said that unfortunately there's not enough positions to hire me. I showed my passion and my love for the job in question, and like the question about helping people. So you tend to find in some interviews they will ask you about like, why do you enjoy helping people? They are not outright, but they basically ask that in some sort of way. So I sold myself there. I was very passionate about my reasoning for becoming a physio and why I enjoy being a physio. And then they said that my personality really shone through, and that's lovely to hear. So I remember walking away from the interview thinking, in comparison to how I did at my interview that I previously shared with you guys, I felt so much more comfortable. It wasn't my ideal scenario. I personally don't like interviewing with other people around me, especially like if it's on the computer. So I remember my husband being at home and I was a bit like, oh, I don't really like the fact that he's there, even though he doesn't know necessarily what I'm talking about. He might be like, she doesn't sound that great, you know? And I remember leaving it thinking, there's a decent chance that I'm not a top contender. I know I'm not a top contender, but it was like, I could be, you know, by the podium, if we're going to go like that, potentially. So I wasn't surprised to hear that I didn't get the job, just based off how I answered some of the questions about, like they said, selling myself in the interview. I think a common theme that you're going to see is that at points I do have difficulty really being like, I bring this to the table, I bring that to the table, and I've done this and I've done that. That's something that I sometimes have difficulty doing in those settings, because I don't want to feel like I'm listing necessarily, or just like other, yeah, it's just an annoying thing. But on the bright side, they recognise my passion for being a physiotherapist, they recognise that I enjoy the role and I love what I'm doing. So that's always a perk. Now, going into my next interview, this one's also for a static position. This was, well, it's within a team, not rotational, but wasn't permanent. It was like a fixed term position. Let's say fixed term position. So I went for that. And that one, the feedback was a little bit better in terms of, like, yeah, I can tell obviously that you're passionate about it and everything. Great. But in terms of the feedback about my clinical knowledge, this is what let me down in this area. So I've got good leadership responses, and my approach to the interview, they really liked how I handled it. In interviews, I have a tendency to have a piece of paper and a pen there, really write down everything so that I'm remembering like the keywords and bits like that. It also then gives you an opportunity, if you feel like you've forgotten something, to then go back and say, hey, from question 3 where you asked blah 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 blah, may I also add da 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 to my answer. most of them, or everyone should let you do that. And unfortunately, what happened is, even though I had my system of writing them down and being like, okay, yes, this, that, I remember forgetting a key part of, let's say, question number 2. And when we moved on to question 3, 4, I still in my head was like, what was that thing I'm forgetting from question number 2? Because I know it's super easy. And it just spiraled at that point. I started rolling downhill and picking up speed because I knew I was forgetting something simple and I was getting frustrated with myself. And I think it showed in the interview that I was like tripping over some of the easier bits because I was focused on trying to figure out what I had forgotten before. And another thing was providing more depth to my answers, in the sense of, so some of the answers were, let's say they asked, what are the components of a falls assessment? I said, checking your blood pressure, checking balance, cognition, things along those lines, your range of motion, your power, boom. But I said it like that, rather than saying, we check the blood pressure because the blood pressure can be an indication for evasive vagal, which may have caused the fall. We're checking power because if the power is poor, like where I could have gone into more detail there. So that was the feedback that I received on that one. And I thought that was fair. When leaving the interview, I was like, I spiraled so badly there. I was like, if I get the fixed term, I get the fixed term. If I don't, I'm not surprised. That is how I felt with that one. And the next one is the rotational one that I went for. Now this one was interesting. There were parts of the interview that I was like, okay, I feel like I've answered that well. And other parts where I was like, oh my God, why are you doing this to me? Right now, asking me these types of questions. It was, yeah. But in terms of the vibe of the interview, I remember, like, this was actually my only face-to-face one. Well, no, because the other one was face-to-face as well. My only one where I had to like actually physically go there, because the other one was on site where I currently work. But I remember everyone was really lovely. We were having a good communication, good talk, everything, good bit of banter, which also settles my nerves, and then also gives them a little taste of what I'm like as well. And the feedback I received from that interview, the rotational one, was that I'm enthusiastic, which, lovely. That they think that I should, in terms of when I say what I've done and everything, instead of saying, me and this colleague did this, or we did that, we did this, I should say, I did this, I did that, and I did this. Which I agree with, in the sense that it helps me sell myself more if I'm saying, I played this role and I did that. But in certain things, it really was a joint effort, so I think, I felt a bit like, but I made it clear what I've done in here, but it was a joint thing, and I don't want to sound like I'm taking credit for something that I didn't do alone. So that was a bit tricky. In a scenario question, I think, from what I remember correctly, with the scenario that we had, the way things are done in that trust is different to how things are done in my current trust. So the process where I would have been like, okay, I'm here, and then I stop. The physios there would be like, I'm here, and then I stop. And so that was interesting in terms of feedback, and I got it. I was like, fair play. And when the person gave me feedback, I did say, and even when I answered the question, I did say, at my trust, this is how we do it, and I wouldn't do what you're asking in my current trust, but not saying I'm not open to doing it for you, but based off what I'm accustomed to doing. And they may have not liked that. I go into interviews being very honest about what I do know and I don't know, and what I'm accustomed to, not in the sense of I expect you to bend to what I'm accustomed to, but just more in the sense of I've been very honest about my scope here. They wanted me to know a bit more about the auditing process. So even up until this point, I've done non-clinical audits, but I've not done any clinical audits. And sometimes that's the little thing that can trip you up, especially if you don't know about the whole auditing process. And when someone says, do you know about the auditing process, it tends to be the clinical side of stuff. I was asked, I was told that they would like me to gain more practical experience. And I think that came from, there was a question about like orthopedics. And unfortunately for me, the interview was, I think, a week before I was meant to rotate onto orthopedics. And when I heard the question, I knew I was screwed. I remember they were like saying something. They were like, okay, and then you got a patient who has da 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 da. And then I was like, what? Like, I'm so confused. Like, what even is that? Until they were like, and it's impacting the L this, and I was like, the spine and the arm. Ortho, really? The back, really? That's what I was saying in my head. Because me, the spine, and the back just ain't friends. We've never been friends. And I was just like, oh. I don't know, I said spine and the back, but like, me and the spine, just like anything rehabbing the back, I've just never been amazing at. So I knew I was screwed at that point. So I was like, fair play. Fair play. Maybe things would have been different if the interview was after I started the rotation. But I was like, it is what it is. And I think a common theme up until that point for the previous interviews have been like, if I get more clinical experience, I might be able to gain more. Or if I get more clinical experience, I might be better fit for said role and be able to like really hit the ground running if I were to join them. And that's what they said there. They also mentioned an interesting one about, so they like my approach to answering like the interviews, again with the paper and the notes like that. And they've said like, what happens, you know in interviews where someone asks you a question and your brain just like, it could be this, it could be that, it could be this, it could be that, like shouting different bits of answers at you, so your brain will be like, oh that's this, so random bits of subjective, random bits of objective assessment, and little bits like that. In interviews, I sometimes find it hard to be like, so in my subjective I'd go through this, and then in my objective I'd go through that. So they said, try and think in that logical approach to assessment, rather than being like, and I'll be over here, and then I'll go over there, and then I'll be here, like that. Another one that caught me off guard for this interview, I remember, was a question about research. And it asked me, what's the most recent, talk about a piece of research that you read recently. Now, the funny thing is, I had read a piece of research recently because I was working on my own case study for some CPD. So I'd read the research of like what I was focusing my case study on. And when they asked, I was thinking, lovely, I read research the other day. Now you know what screwed me over? They asked me for, I could give the title, I just couldn't remember the name of the person who wrote it or like what it was published under. I'm not good with that type of stuff. So that screwed me over, so it kind of sounded like I made it up on the spot. Yay. So advice to myself, advice to you guys, read a piece of research before you go to an interview, and just in case they ask you, you can just throw it in there so they're aware that you keep up to date with regular research. But my most recent interview, I'll close this because I don't have much to about for that one, but my last interview was for a static position with actually a combination of these two specialities that I really enjoy. So when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, finally, a role I love. And the interview went really well. It went very good, and I was like so happy about it. It wasn't like the best circumstances in terms of like the setting I was doing the interview in, but it went well. I felt like I really sold myself. I took on board all the feedback that I had from previous interviews. I even read like pages of research days before the interview, so I was prepared for the interview. And like if they asked me anything about, oh, what recent research have you read on da-da-da-da-da, I could be like, and this person et al said da-da-da-da-da-da, and they suggest da-da-da-da, and in my opinion, that I was ready when I went in there about, I was like, I've done this, I've done that, and by me doing this, I'll be able to offer that. I literally was like a Cheshire cat, like, smashed it out the park. Yes. And unfortunately, I didn't get the job. And I was like, no, why not? because it looked great, and like I have experience in both the areas and the place I applied for, great. I also have experience working with them before in other in other situation. So I was like, oh, this would be the dream. The feedback I received was regarding like trust values. So obviously, as I've harped on about several times before, in interviews, in personal statements, etc., it's important to show that you are aware of the trust values. Now, I'll go into this more in next week's video where I touch on Band 5 interviews. But trust values now, they weigh heavy in an interview. Yes, your knowledge is obviously important, but the importance of a trust value is how they are able to tell if you, not one, just fit into the role, but if you can fit into a team as well. So, my trust that I'm currently at interviews is heavily like, yes, there may be a question that might outright ask you, what are the trust values and how do you exhibit the trust values? But for the most part, in every answer you give, they're very much looking for you to be like, I'm reliable, I'm honest, teamwork. In every single answer you give, they want to see elements of that. So I went with that approach of giving elements. But the feedback was, you did great in terms of giving elements, and we could tell that you will follow our trust values and you exhibit our trust values. We just needed you to maybe say them. That would be the only thing. Now I was like, oh, that's so annoying. Like, I appreciated the feedback, and that was the only piece of feedback that I received. But part of me was like, oh, that's so upsetting to be the only piece of feedback. Because like you said, I exhibited the trust values. Now, the perk of that, well, not even the perk, the best thing about that interview was that they loved me. They said that it would be a great fit to the team. If they were able to hire more people, they definitely would have given me a role. And obviously hearing stuff like that is amazing. It gives you a big perk, like a big pump up, and you're like, yes, I'm actually on the right track. I'm not delusional that I could fit a role like this. People, think I'd be appropriate for it, and I interview well for this, and I've grown and I've taken on board the feedback that I've received in different interviews to shape me to this point. But I was just so close, so close. But yeah, just to wrap it up for you guys, because you're probably thinking, girl, really? But to wrap it up, I would say, for me, moving forward, I'm gonna keep looking, obviously, and when I go into other interviews, top thing is I'm really going to sell myself. I'm not gonna undervalue myself. I'm gonna say what I've done, what I can do, and what I can bring. I'm definitely going to make sure that I'm keeping up to date, reading relevant research to that hospital or that specialty area before the interview, so I have something fresh up here to remember. I'm always going to make sure that my personality shines through, because that's a big thing about when you're looking for a job, especially in a static role. You've got to really fit into that team. You're not rotating around in the next couple of months. So bringing my personality to the table as well. And yeah, in the meantime, I'm going to keep rotating unless something comes up, and hopefully keep growing even as I go on to repeat rotations. But I'll see you guys in next week's video, where I talk about Band 5 interviews and trust values. Bye guys.